Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I know finding a seat is a challenge. Please raise your hand if there's anything next to you that's opened up. Okay, so the first order of business. Nobody's going to say how many people were here tonight. We're over capacity. So the most important things, because, you know, I'm always belt and suspenders about everything, the fire exits. The fire exits are right here. There's a stairway down. There's the way you came up in the back, and there's another fire exit just on the other side of the stage, okay? Bathrooms are downstairs, and this is a very agreeable group, so I think with a nice excuse me and a nudge, 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 you should be good. So welcome. I'm Lynn Bjorkman. I'm representing the Marine Library, and I'm welcoming you on behalf of the countless volunteers that keep our library going and our co-sponsor this evening, Scandia Heritage Alliance. First of all, in the new tradition of the Marine Community Library, we begin with the reading of our land acknowledgement statement. Please join me as we collectively take a breath and listen to the message it provides to guide our learning this evening. Marine Community Library and the communities it serves are located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homelands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. This land was ceded to the United States in the treaties of 1837, resulting in the colonization, genocide, and forced removal of the Dakota and Anishinaabe. The settlers who followed and the residents since have benefited as a result. Marine Community Library acknowledges this legacy and is committed to examining the roots of racial inequity and building better relationships with the land and one another. Before we get started, I have a couple brief announcements on the library. Our fall schedule is going at a full tilt. The first after this evening is on Thursday of this week at 7 p.m. here in the Village Hall, when we will host Arrow Broken's Poetry Collective, which is led by Rosie Peters, Kate Seitz, and Susie Hudson. The public, yay. The public is invited to attend this free monthly event celebrating the power of poetry. Arrow Broken will welcome the powerful voice of the poet Klecko. You will find more information on the library website, but I'll just note that Klecko has had more poems published in the New York Times over the last decade than anyone else. After Klecko's performance, Arrow Broken holds an open mic for all other poets to share their work. With a 3-minute time limit, the theme this month is Love as an Act of Defiance. You know it when you feel it. Coming up soon is the kickoff to the 12th season of Marine Documentary Night on October 2nd, so a week later at 7 p.m. It features a quirky but thoughtful, multi-award-winning documentary called Secret Mall Apartment. The film recounts the story of a group of Rhode Island artists who create a secret apartment in a major shopping mall and go undetected for 4 years. There's much more to the story than that. The documentary is executive produced by the actor Jesse Eisenberg. There are also family and children events that have started off. Please look at our website, marinecommunitylibrary.com, for all these details and more. And now, most importantly, tonight's presentation. We've got 2 presenters, and they will each be presenting, and then will be followed by a Q&A. We will have Jim Maher kind of skipping through the crowd with a microphone so that you can be heard, because we are recording this evening's event. I want to see the skipping. Now, most importantly, here we are, Where the Waters Remember, Dakota Life Along the St. Croix. We're honored to bring you this opportunity to learn in conjunction with Scandia Heritage Alliance. Just a note that we are recording. You'll be able to find the replay on the library's website. First of all, we have Cheyanne St. John, the oldest granddaughter of Ernest Wabasha, a sixth-generation hereditary chief in a long-established Dakota chieftainship. Ms. St. John was born and raised in Minneapolis by her parents, Teresa Wabasha of the Lower Sioux Indian community and Benny St. John of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. She graduated from Fond du Lac Tribal College in 2002 with an Associate of Arts degree. Between 2003 and 2006, she attended the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque and participated in the Museum Studies program at Santa Fe's Institute of American Indian Arts. In 2014, she began to manage the Lower Sioux Agency Historic Site. And in 2018, became the director of the Kanseape Cultural Department and is a Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Lower Sioux Indian community. Tonight, Ms. St. John will provide perspective to deepen our understanding of the indigenous history in the River Valley. Also speaking tonight is Ed Fleming, Curator of Anthropology at the Science Museum of Minnesota. Dr. Fleming's research focuses on the archaeology, come on, Lynn, you're gonna make it, of North America, particularly the upper Midwest, especially examining patterns of mobility, social interaction, and environmental changes from the end of the last ice age up to European colonization. The diverse cultural collections at the Science Museum, however, have inspired broad interests, and Dr. Fleming's philosophy is a community-focused approach to improving collections access, working in partnership to ensure to the greatest degree possible that the collections and documentation are accessible to the indigenous communities from which they originated. Dr. Fleming will provide an update on the Science Museum of Minnesota's research into the history and archaeology of the Lower Saint Croix before European colonization. Thank you to both of you for creating tonight's presentation.
Hello, everybody. It's a privilege to be here, and I love the turnout. This is fantastic. I'm Ed Fleming, Curator of Anthropology at the Science Museum. I want to thank Lynn and Liz and Rosie for organizing this event, and especially I want to thank Cheyanne for co-presenting tonight. It's really a privilege. So today we're going to give two presentations, I hope overlapping perspectives on the history and archaeology of the St. Croix, especially the Lower St. Croix, which is where I have the most experience. I'm an archaeologist, and I'll be talking about artifacts, and I'll be talking about environmental change. So that's really one lens to look at the archaeology of the valley is the evidence, the artifacts that have been found, and to try to put that into context along with the environmental changes that have happened over the last 12, maybe 13,000 years or more since Minnesota became ice-free. But first I want to introduce my department a little bit. So that's my team. Most of my team, well, it's all of my team minus two. Selena and Taylor have recently moved on to, in the middle, they moved on to other things. But so that's the archaeology crew on the left. We're out at Lake Benton where we've been doing some research. And then that's Pajuta Hakaredigo on the right, who's the assistant curator for Native American art at the museum. And she works on a lot of consultations and works with indigenous artists to commission artwork to put into the collection. So a little more about some of our projects that we're involved in the anthropology department at the Science Museum. And I guess I've got this lapel microphone so I can walk around a little bit, which is nice. We work with Native American artists to build the collection and also have a very active consultation program. We have a collection in the museum that spans the globe. The whole collection, including paleontology and biology, we have about 2 million specimens and objects and works of art. And the collection represents over 100,000 years of time from European stone tools that are over 100,000 years old on up to contemporary artworks. that we've purchased. But it's really important that we do consultations with indigenous communities to ensure that what we have in the collection is okay for us to have, because not everything in the collection is necessarily okay for the museum to have. And so we want to repatriate those things and give them back. And so that's an active program. Also, on the more recent side of things, we also have a program where we're working with Maya weavers in the highlands of Chiapas, and they're helping us to digitize our collection of weavings and inform, help us learn more about them and inform, what's in the catalog, but also we're bringing textiles down to the weavers so that they can examine them and, keep that tradition alive and learn from these historic pieces. On the archaeology side of things, we have a couple active projects. The Lake Benton project, which is investigating a very old site that was repeatedly used that goes back over 13,000 years, and I'll mention that a little bit more in a little while. We have a project that is looking at archaic traditions, which I'll explain what that means in a minute. A state-funded project where they've asked us to investigate these traditions, but really to focus in on copper traditions as well. And so I'll talk about ancient copper, one of the oldest metalworking traditions in the whole world. Started here in the valley and in the Lake Superior area. And then really, close to home here in Marine, I've been teaching a series of archaeological field schools for the University of Minnesota, which we've hosted at the St. Croix Watershed Research Station or at the Pine Needles property, which is just north of town a little bit. And there we're training students about how to properly and systematically survey for archaeological sites and to collect data from them. So there's a couple pictures of the field schools. And one of the jokes I make about this, I always take a picture of the field school. And so I have, going back to 2011, I've got a picture of me standing by a bunch of students. And if I go through them, I'm the only one who ever ages. But back to the St. Croix Valley a little bit. So these two presentations hopefully overlap. I'm going to be talking about technology and environment, and Cheyanne is going to talk kind of bigger picture about, if I understand, about the work that she does in site stewardship and provide a cultural lens to it. And so in terms of the St. Croix Valley, it's a really interesting place to be working, and I thank the community of Marine on St. Croix for being so welcoming and so interested in the history and heritage of this river valley. It's really fascinating, and geographically it's a north-south conduit, and so it really cross-cuts different environmental biomes, and it connects the big woods to the north with the prairies and the Mississippi Valley. It connects the Lake Superior Basin to the Valley of the Mississippi, the largest lake in the continent to the largest river on the continent. So I'm going to go through and describe the archaeological framework that we as archaeologists often use to divide up and try and make sense out of time. And this is really, really generalized, and that's on purpose. And what I want you to see, there's these different archaeological periods: Paleo-Indian, Archaic, Woodland, late pre-contact, post-contact. And the takeaway from this is I want you to look at the dates and really how generalized they are. We don't really know these specific dates of these changes, and so we create these boxes to try and make sense of when different things changed and how they align with environmental changes. And I have the 13,000 in quotes at the very far, ancient times, because we don't know exactly when people first moved into Minnesota or back into Minnesota. We do know that there was a mile of ice over us about 15,000 years ago or so. The earliest radiocarbon date we have from an archaeological feature is from Lake Benton, and it's 13,500 years ago. So it's a very, very long time ago. And then in the middle, this period that we call Archaic, it's so vast. It's, what is that? It's 8,500 years of time that we're trying to make sense of some of these changes and really relying on technology largely to define these periods. And then the other thing that I want to draw your attention to is this little skinny, and it's probably even too thick, this post-contact period. That's it for, post-European colonization. This whole timeline is indigenous history, and it's only this little skinny part at the end where European contact comes into play. So what I'm going to do is walk through time briefly over the next 15 minutes or so, and just give an overview of each of these periods and some of the technological things that we've found, the evidence that we've found, and walk through time up to the late pre-contact period, and then turn it over to Cheyanne. But before I get started, I do want to say we did bring some artifacts from the collections of the Science Museum, and I thought about inviting you all up to take a look at it beforehand, but that really seemed like a bad idea. And so we will hang out here afterwards, and if you want to kind of circulate and take a look at some of the items, some of the artifacts that you'll see pictures of, we have the real things right here, so for you to examine and enjoy. And one of my colleagues, Mara Taft over here, raise your hand, will be up here too, and we'll help interpret some of these at the end. So to start out, so right after the glaciers, this is the so-called Paleo-Indian period, the first people in Minnesota. The earliest date we have is about 13,500, and that's from way up on the Coteau in southwestern Minnesota. It was one of the first ice-free parts of Minnesota, and so it makes sense that that's where we find that evidence. But we also haven't looked everywhere. I will say that technologically speaking, technologically speaking, what we find as evidence for this period of time are really beautifully made long, what we call lancelet-shaped spear points, like you see pictured here. And they tend to be made out of a mixture of local raw materials, but also some really, really far distance raw materials. So that suggests to us that at that time, 13,000 years ago or so, people were moving a lot. We also sometimes find them in association with extinct animals like mammoths, mastodons, giant bison, things like that. There are no sites of mammoth or mastodon with stone tools in Minnesota that we have found, but there are several in Wisconsin and some of the surrounding states, so they're almost certainly here. Environmentally, this is the post-glacial landscape. The glaciers had been receding for a while, and there's a lot of glacial outwash melt that was occurring, and which formed some really, really large glacial lakes. The most famous is called Lake Agassiz, which I should have put a picture in here, but it's truly massive, almost ocean-sized lake that sat right in the middle of North America. So we'll move forward into this archaic period. So this is that 8,500 year period. Some of the things that we find, well, first, environmentally speaking, this is a period of increased warming and aridity. And there's a period that we call the altithermal, but it's a time when the environment over Minnesota was very warm, very dry, and the grasslands extended, the prairie forest border extended all the way across Minnesota. So pretty much, except for the very northern part of Minnesota, Minnesota was all prairie, it was all grassland. Think like eastern South Dakota. All of that was what Minnesota looked like at that time. Technologically, we have, instead of all of these like very uniform spear points, stone spear points that lasted for thousands of years, we see all this diversity in different kinds of weapon points and made out of a lot of local raw materials. And that tells us, just provides clues that, well, maybe there was a little less mobility. There was certainly still like trade and such, but maybe a little less mobility at that time. But there's a couple new kinds of tools that show up during this archaic period. And one is groundstone tools. So on the right, you have, that's a groundstone axe. You can see the groove that goes around the middle is attached to a handle. And we start to find all sorts of these groundstone tools, like heavy chopping tools, woodworking tools, adzes, and axes. And I have a couple on the table over here that you guys can take a look at. And we found in the valley here, we found a site actually on the property of the St. Croix Watershed Research Station, which was a basalt axe making site. One of the best tools for making, one of the best raw materials, best stone materials for making heavy axes and adze happens to be basalt, or other igneous rocks, volcanic rocks can do too, but basalt is a really fine-grained material. There happens to be a lot of basalt in the valley because millions, and I forget how many, but so many millions of years ago, the continent of North America started to break apart into two continents. And so there's actually a rift system that goes from the Lake Superior Valley all the way down to Kansas, where North America started to split apart. And where basalt forms is at these like seafloor spreading sites, if you think of like Hawaii and so on. And basalt from the Earth's crust started to bubble up here, and that's why we have like the cliffs at Taylor's Falls and so on. That's all basalt. So there's a lot of basalt in the valley. And so doing survey at the research station, it was actually my predecessor, Orrin Shane, who found this site, doing survey over there and discovered an area that just had thousands and thousands. It was in one of the fields right off of Highway 95. Thousands and thousands of flakes of stone from making stone tools. And so we did an excavation, and back in a long time ago, and this picture right here, that's actually me with my back to you, a long time ago. And so we did an excavation and discovered that it was a site where all of that chipping debris, all those flakes of stone were created when people were picking up the basalt and making stone axes, these ground stone axes, out of that basalt. And we know how old that site is. It's in the late period of the Archaic because of those two spear points, atlatl dart points, that are of a style that we're able to say roughly how old it is, about 3,000 to 5,000 years old. So I want to talk a little bit about the copper industry, and I already, kind of one of the headlines I already said is that the copper tradition from the Great Lakes is one of the oldest metalworking traditions in the whole world, which is pretty cool, really. And so beginning around 7,000, actually a little bit older than 7,000, and probably beginning, we don't know those beginnings very well, but in that neighborhood, indigenous people living here were picking up, mining actually, not necessarily just picking up, sometimes picking it up, but mining copper from copper veins that is associated with the basalt in some cases around here, but more often, the primary sources are up like on the Keweenaw Peninsula of the upper peninsula of Michigan and Isle Royale. But also, because of all that glacial action, there's a lot of float copper that was transported by the glaciers down into this area, in the valley, and especially at, like in the Pine City area. There's a lot of copper deposits. And so as part of a project that we currently have to investigate these traditions in Minnesota, we wanted to try and figure out the ages of some of these copper tools. And we had a pretty good frame of how old some of these are, and some tools have been dated before. But we brought together a collection of 15 stone tools from the museum's collections, but also private collectors. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, but sort of unfortunately, copper is metal, and so it's easily found by metal detectors. And so there's metal detectorists who collect these, and I don't know if any of you are metal detectorists, but what you do when you're taking out of the ground is you're removing that from its archaeological context and removing it from anything else you might hope to learn from it. However, in working with some folks who have these in their collection, we were able to pull together a nice assemblage of copper tools to try and date them. And one of the really cool things about copper is that it has antimicrobial properties, which means that the microbes that decompose organic materials don't like copper and tend to stay away from copper, which means that sometimes you get lucky and the remains of a spear shaft, a wooden spear shaft, can be preserved in a copper point. And so on the left side, that projectile point, you see all the brown that's kind of in the socket, that's all preserved wood. And preserved wood is datable with radiocarbon dating. Radiocarbon dating only dates organic material, and it measures when an organism died. And so we collected a bunch of points. Some of them had preserved wood in the socket, and we were able to get dates for these. Most of them dated in the neighborhood of around 3,000 to 5,000 years old, which is kind of when we knew a lot of copper working was happening in the area. But one of them, this guy up in the upper right-hand corner, also had wood preserved. It's a conical shaped spear point, maybe a harpoon point, and it had wood preserved down in that socket. And we got a date of nearly 8,000 years. So that really does comfortably put it among the oldest copper working traditions in the world. So that's fresh, and we haven't even published it yet. That just is brand new data for you guys. So now I want to move forward a little bit to our next period, and that's the woodland period. And this is a time, I know that there's a lot of ceramicists in the valley. It's an important tradition. And so you guys might be interested in this time period. About 2,500 years ago is when we first see really a new innovation of ceramic containers being made in the valley. And the earliest date that we have in Minnesota is about 2,500 years ago. And that also provides archaeologists another source of data. It's not just stone tools, animal bone. Ceramics are, I mean, they're beautiful, and you can make a pot or a ceramic object into anything you want it to be, anything in the mind of the artist. But also, they're nearly indestructible. Pots, of course, you can break, but those sherds, they're man-made metamorphic rocks. So it's a whole new source of data that can tell us about different art traditions and how people interact and trade, and not only trade the pottery, but whatever's in the pottery, and starts to build out that sort of picture. And also, archaeological sites of this period are the most numerous of any period represented in archaeologically in the history of the area. And part of that might be population increase. Absolutely, that's possible. But another part of that could be we just have another kind of data. And so that tells us that, you know, this is not an archaic site. Environmentally speaking, this is a time where we start seeing the reforestation of Minnesota after that altithermal grassland everywhere period. And the forests start to come back, and they come back a little bit different than they were before. And we have a lot of these woodland sites. So I'm going to move into, and I will say that one of the sites that we've been investigating on the north side of town, the Pine Needles site, all of these artifacts came from that site. And what we have there is, I mean, it's a small area. I mean, it would fit in this room probably. But we have, and even from our very small excavated areas, we have 40 or more individual distinct pottery vessels, the remains of, we never find the whole pot. But lots and lots of diversity in the decorations and so on. And then moving into the late pre-contact period, we have kind of two environmental events at this time. One's called the medieval warm period because it occurred between 900 and 1300, and it was a time of kind of idyllic sort of weather and climate in the Midwest. In the Southwest, it was a different story. There was a major drought at that time. But in the Midwest, it was really kind of perfect for agriculture. And what we see is, I didn't mention this with the woodland period, but a very important innovation at that time is the development and expansion of agriculture. During this late pre-contact period, after about 1200, that just explodes. And there's agriculture everywhere, and gardening, and big fields, and so on. And also with that, large agricultural villages. Especially kind of in this weird circle that I put on there. At the top of that is the Sheffield site, and I'll talk about that in a second. With this late pre-contact period in the valley, in the Mississippi Valley, we call it the Oneota tradition. I think it's kind of an unfortunate name because it sounds like an indigenous name, but it's not. It's actually named after the Oneota River in Iowa, where they found a bunch of pottery. And Oneota really correlates to really a pottery tradition. And a slight difference in the pottery, we start seeing, at this time, go back to my previous picture, you can see an assemblage there on the left. Really big globular vessels, probably for storage, storing, grain and water and so on. Also, shell tempering becomes, the norm for making these pots. Instead of crushed granite, shell is added as the tempering agent. But settlement in large agricultural villages. This tradition, I guess I would kind of expect it to be more common in the St. Croix Valley, but the Sheffield site, which is just south off of Sheffield Lane, a little ways from here, is really the only late pre-contact farming village that we know of in the St. Croix Valley. And we've got a bunch of artifacts from that site here. I suspect there are more, but we haven't found them yet. And now I'll close just by talking a little bit about trade and economies and interaction. I find that fascinating just to think about how people used a landscape and moved on the landscape, especially on a social interaction, in terms of social interaction. One really good clue that we have archaeologically to look at that helps us understand ancient economies and interaction are tool stones. We find a lot of stone tools and the byproducts from making stone tools even more so. And when you look at those stone materials, we're able to often tell where they came from. Now there's certainly glacially transported stone materials that were used for making stone tools. And that could be how we find, how we end up with some of the northern sources in the St. Croix Valley, but we also see other materials as well, like raw materials from southern Minnesota or from western Wisconsin, from western Minnesota also. You start to see this network of movement and trade and interaction. Burlington shirt, moving down the list, from southeast Iowa. It's a very high quality, very bright white material, traded throughout the upper Midwest for sure. And then this little scraping tool that I've pictured there is a piece of obsidian. And obsidian is volcanic glass. It's kind of the perfect raw material for making sharp cutting tools. If you fracture it, it can get down to very, very thin, scalpel-like sharpness to it. And we do find, so that tool was found in the St. Croix Valley on the Wisconsin side at the Fred C. Anderson Scout Reservation. And we found other flakes of obsidian in the valley. And the only way you could get obsidian in the valley is if somebody brought it here. And so it's a really good illustration of this vast continental-wide network of trade, interaction, and exchange. People moved all the time and had long-distance contacts. The closest source of obsidian is western Wyoming at Obsidian Cliffs at Yellowstone Park, over 1,000 miles away. So it's a great illustration that that little tool probably changed a lot of hands, or people were traveling quite a bit. And that raises the question of, so if obsidian was coming into the valley, what was moving out? What was, the reciprocal exchange? And one is almost certainly copper. And copper tools made from Lake Superior copper have been found as far away as Louisiana, Florida, and the East Coast, the Atlantic coast. So a really good illustration of just this vast network of continental scale network of exchange. And so I'm going to close there and hand it over to Cheyanne. It's going to take us just a minute to switch the microphones and bring up Cheyanne's presentation. So sit tight for a moment. can hang on that one for Q&A. Okay.
Okay. May I have your attention? I'm going to very, very quickly run over to the brookside and grab some sage because Cheyanne has asked that I smudge. So I'm going to ask that you please give us just like a 3-minute grace, okay? I'll run. I'll be right back.
You need this or not?
Attention, everyone. I'm back. Cheyanne? All right.
Oh, we don't.
Here, I'm going to give this to Jim. Do you want to do it back there?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. That was fast.
I told you 3 minutes.
Is that our mic guy? Is this on? Is this on? Is this on?
He'll turn you on. He's got the volume.
Good to go? Yeah. Matakiapi. My name is Cheyanne St. I'm coming. Hello. Thank you guys for your patience with our brief intermission there. Thank you to Rosie for making that quick dash down to retrieve her smudge. My name is Cheyanne St. I'm visiting you today from Chachayapi. It's the Dakota name for my home, also known as the Lower Saint Indian community where I live and work. I've worked with the tribe for about 10 years in different capacities. I currently am serving as their cultural department director. Prior to that, I served as their historic site manager and tribal researcher for about 5 or 6 years before moving into my current role. So I'm gonna start by introducing myself in my language, and then I'll translate that for you. Hamatakiapi, mi Cheyanne St. Imakiapi, Chanshayapi, Hemataha, Damakota Ka'a Hahatua, Badewa Kantua, Hemacha. I told you my name is Cheyanne St. I'm here from Lower Sioux. I am Dakota and Ojibwe, and I come from the Spirit Lake dwellers known as the Badewa Kantua. So I wanted to thank you guys for inviting our community as part of this presentation and event tonight. Everybody that I've met today has been so hospitable, and just wanted to extend my gratitude and thanks for being in your community today. I'm going to get started by just sharing a little bit about what I do as a Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. And for those of you who have never heard what THPOs are, Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, I'm just going to share a little bit of background information into what the program is and what some of our roles and responsibilities are as historic preservation officers. THPO responsibilities and the laws associated with THPO, a lot of legislation and congressional action was taking place in the 1900s. And this was a result of a wide awareness that had started to arise regarding landmarks and historic properties that were significant to the United States American heritage. During this time period, people were looting and desecrating Native American burials to collect, claiming that they were maintaining the meaning of those sites and locations. And these were often citizens and professionals. So laws had to be created to govern how archaeology was done at that time and to provide protection for these sites. In 1990, Congress directed the National Park Service to evaluate the preservation needs of tribes. So the law that governed us was created in 1966, and some 25 years later, these issues started to arise. And during that evaluation of tribal preservation needs, the establishment of annual funding for tribal historic preservation offices was developed. So the law that governed us, THPOs, is the National Historic Preservation Act, and that requires tribes to submit a formal plan to the National Park Service describing how we're gonna fold out our THPO responsibilities and functions. And we submit that to NPS, and they approve it. So 6 years later, after Congress makes this directive, the first ever tribal historic preservation offices were established. In our Midwest region, Standing Rock was the very first, and they often like to brag that they were the first THPO in our area. So just a little fun fact. In 2006 is when Lower Sioux Indian community, where I'm from, submitted their preservation plan to the National Park Service for the establishment of our THPO office. It was through a memorandum of agreement with the National Park Service that Lower Sioux was funded and became operational that following year in 2007. We had 4 main goals at that time. The first one was to assume the responsibility and stewardship for all cultural remains of the Mdewakanton and Wakpekute Dakota in Minnesota unless ownership can be documented by direct descendants from other Mdewakanton communities within Minnesota or outside the state. Second was to increase the knowledge of the Mdewakanton history, culture, and tradition in the state of Minnesota and the historical land base of the Dakota as a whole. The third is to preserve the cultural heritage for future generations of Mdewakanton and Wakpekute. And the last is to support the continuity of the Mdewakanton and Wakpekute culture and language for future generations. So a lot of what we do as TIPO officers falls outside the regulatory and compliance roles. We do everything from language preservation to digitization of oral stories and photographs, newspaper clippings, anything that has to do with culture in our community, it often somehow filters through our department. So ultimately, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers are a regulatory office, and we're responsible to ensure that federal, state, and local agencies comply with the guidelines of the National Historic Preservation Act, also known as the Section 106 process. We consult and we strategize mitigation measures to affirm that the ancestral homelands of the Bide-Wakantua people are protected. We assist with the planning and the compliance that is needed for economic development within our tribal communities and confirm known cultural resources are protected. So that's within our tribal borders that we regulate some of those actions. Tribal monitors or tribal cultural specialists are also liaisons that serve the tribe and interact with agencies to ensure that TIPO recommendations are followed regarding project activity. So any recommendations that we make to an agency, if we can't be on site to monitor those projects or that activity, we send out our TCSs or tribal monitors. Our office maintains a presence in tribal historic preservation work today through activities like our community-wide survey of our tribal lands. So within Lower Sioux, we've mapped about 59 sites, contributed to 139 state historic preservation files, 275 historic properties, and of these, barely 24 are within the 2,100 acre trust land that we call our tribal boundaries. So we do a lot of work outside our community. We also do a lot of interpretation projects for public and private sectors, so like parks and rec. We oftentimes are engaging with them to assure that content is culturally accurate. We conduct interviews with tribal elders and other folks within our community just to make sure that the oral story and oral tradition continues to live on. We implement databases and records management systems. We network and we try to increase the participation that we have on boards, committees, and councils, because we really are able to keep a better pulse on what's happening within our communities by having a presence on things like these preservation boards, councils, and other committees. So. The National Historic Preservation Act that I mentioned earlier, that was a part of a Senate bill that was passed into law in October of 1966. The purpose of the legislation was to protect the United States' historic and archaeological sites. NHPA was a benchmark law for conducting archaeology. So it created a study context for state sites. What's interesting is the federal government developed this framework, which means that they have the ultimate oversight on how state sites are impacted. It was in 1990 that Congress, like I said, directed the National Park Service to assess the tribal needs, tribal preservation needs, and that resulted in a 1992 amendment to the Historic Preservation Act that allowed us to establish TIPOs. It allowed the tribes to take on the responsibility of the state historic preservation officers on our tribal lands. So before that, it was mainly the tribal government that was engaging in a lot of these issues regarding cultural sites. The law ultimately provides the mechanisms for tribe to assume any or all of the functions of a state historic preservation officer on reservation and tribal trust lands. The act also requires federal agencies to evaluate the impact of all federally funded or permitted projects on historic properties. So things like air pollution control permits, even if they're not developing anything, it's still a federally funded permitted process that requires the agency to engage with tribes through consultation. This map here identifies the ancestral homelands of our Dakota, particularly our Ocheki. For those that are not familiar with the term ancestral homelands, this refers to the original territories that Dakota people historically migrated as part of our traditional lifeway. Because of the historic activities that took place in some of these areas, it's highly likely when development occurs that traces of our ancestry, whether it's habitation or cultural resources, will be present. So that's why we try to maintain a presence in the consultation process so we can review and make sure that we are avoiding disruption to sensitive and significant sites across our homelands. The Lower Sioux Indian community currently consults with we currently hold interest with 169 counties in 4 different states. So we're getting notified on an average of about 75 times per week from different state and federal agencies about development and permitting that is taking place across the region. And for a long time, it was just me, so that was really, really inundating. The village map here, or this is also another map illustration of the Ocheki homeland. So we really try to stay away from delineating boundaries, and because we didn't recognize state lines and territory lines the way we do today. And so rather than kind of share that version of the earlier map, we utilize this when we're talking about historic and traditional association across the region. It's, we're in Canada as far as some parts of Wyoming, so it's just it's a safer bet to use this as well. So here in where I'm from in Southwest Minnesota, that portion of the state is the least archaeologically and tribally surveyed, but it has the highest number of private collectors. The state of Minnesota has nearly 20,000 archaeological sites, with only about 43 of those having an Eastern Dakota context or component. So that means like of all of those 20,000, only 43 are recognized as being associated with Dakota history or having that tie there. So it's pretty interesting. And then the village map here just kind of shows the concentration over time of different village sites in our part of the river valley. And as you get to the east side of the map there, you can see the Fort Snelling and St. Paul area. And as you move north, this is an illustration of this portion of the river valley, but it was equally as concentrated over time with other village sites associated to the Anishinaabe and Dakota. So, this portion of the presentation will focus on the challenges that tribal historic preservation officers and Native people face in the field of archaeology and Western sciences. Chief among them are the classification systems and terminology that is used to define and describe some of the sites and eras and some of the things that Ed was talking about. It's important to remember that Native people are not a racial group or a racial category. Indian people are a political group. We belong to nations. To work within a framework and a classification system that was so foreign from our traditional way of thinking and viewing our relatives, our relationship with the land, continues to be a barrier. By the 19th century, the scientific debate focused on whether human biological difference was just a racial variation or represented an entirely different species. The species theory, polygenism, held that human races were of different lineages and suggested a hierarchy that outlined here in this chart called the chain of being. In the 1820s and 1830s, a Philadelphia physician named Samuel Morton collected and measured hundreds of human skulls in order to confirm that there were differences among the races, in particular, a difference in brain size. His systemic large-scale experiments made him a pioneer of American race science and physical anthropology. Morton was a proponent of polygenism, which theorized that different races were different species with separate origins. Morton amassed a large collection of human skulls from all around the world. He believed that he could identify any skull's racial origin simply by measuring it, and developed tables based on his experiments, which involved pouring lead pellets into skull cavities. Morton assigned the highest brain capacity to Europeans, with the English being highest of all. Second was the Chinese. Third was the Southeast Asians and Polynesians. Fourth was the American Indians, and the smallest brain capacity was assigned to African Americans and Australian Aborigines. The collection of skulls is now in the Museum of Philadelphia's Academy of Natural Sciences. Later on, as this wave of scientific discovery was happening, another well-known anthropologist, Franz Boas, displayed the remains of the Docus First Nations people at the 1893 World Expo. The scientific theme selected that year for the World Expo was evolution. And the aim of the exhibit was to demonstrate the superiority of the white race and the victory of modern civilization. The misclassification of indigenous people only lent itself to society justifying the mistreatment of our remains, exiling tribes from our ancestral homelands, and discounting our connections to land. The systems of classification are absent of our traditional spiritual values and beliefs. They don't represent how we governed ourselves, the importance of gender roles, nor the relationship that we had with Unchimaka, which is the earth. It was a very monolithic way compared to our cultural understanding of these relationships. Yet even today, we're still forced to define the sacredness of our lands within policy and narrative that we never contributed to, such as these classifications and these terminologies. And that is changing. Early archaeological records were intended to be esoteric, so that means like it's really hard to understand them. You gotta be a specialist to kind of understand some of the things that you're reading. So with tribal historic preservation offices, especially within the state of Minnesota, not really coming to the table until like the late 1990s, early 2000s, a lot had already been happening in the profession of archaeology. So tribes had a lot of catching up to do and still do even today. The point that I wanted to make was that it's really challenging to translate the context of the archaeological record. A lot of it can be misleading or just wrong. The record is, however, essential. We see the value in the archaeological record. 99% of cultures can only be understood through archaeology. And later on, I'll discuss how this is changing in Minnesota through partnerships between tribes and museums and historical societies. This part of the presentation, or this slide, I labeled Matakuye Owasin, which means that we are all related. It's a concept, a philosophy, a value. It's a way of life for Dakota people. It's simple, but also very complex. Our people share a deep-rooted connection to place and how we view our natural environment. We draw on cultural and traditional teachings to create genuine understanding and life lessons that connect with everybody. We know that our DNA is here and that we are stewards responsible for the well-being of the earth. And that means protecting all of our relatives, from the plants on the prairie to the waters of our lakes and rivers and everything that falls within. We all fall under the umbrella of humanity as relatives, and the Dakota understand and honor this relationship even today. The oral stories that are shared and passed down in communities help us understand many things: how we came to be where we are, how and when certain families came to live with the people, why certain areas are sacred and significant. Some of these oral histories, although not written, guide us to a broader understanding of who we are as a people. This part of the presentation helps shed some light on traditional worldviews and the importance of those in the compliance and regulatory framework that TIPOs work in. And I know that I kind of just ranted a little bit about classifications and terminology, and I kind of reflected on some of this discussion here and caught myself doing that again. So spatial thinking versus temporal thinking. Dakota people historically were spatial thinkers, and this is what allowed us to survive in nearly any environment. We were governed first and foremost by our kinship. We were tribal, communal thinkers. An individualistic way of being was very foreign to us. We thought for the good of all of our relatives. And I explained what some of those relatives were. They were just the physical and human beings that we know. It was the water and the rocks and the trees. As spatial thinking people, the land was all that we had, and that relationship was equally as significant as any others in our lives. Our contemporary understanding of cultural places and sites, in particular, the identification of place, has moved to a temporal historical understanding. So today, in the framework of compliance and regulatory, these are the changes that are affecting the way we think about our landscape, right? So historically, our sacred and significant areas could not be separated. We didn't say that this one block radius was significant for X, Y, and Z reasons. It was a contiguous border, or it was contiguous in our historic way of thinking. And these sites couldn't be separated. So distinguishing these areas now has relied on understanding the environment or the cultural experience. So we really rely on oral stories to kind of tell us more about the significance of place or the sacredness of any one location. And that's a different way of thinking about the land than we historically used to have to. In the interest of preservation, we now have to view our sites as temporal to conduct some of the archaeological studies that are required to preserve and protect sites, such as traditional cultural surveys, traditional cultural landscape studies, regular archaeological surveys. We did not recognize these places as first or last, or having the biggest this or the smallest that. It just wasn't how we viewed our landscape or how we interpreted significance and sacredness. They weren't sacred for any of those reasons, but rather the significance was the relationship that we had with that geographic area, and whatever experience happened there, how it was central to our historic and traditional experience. So for example, the first inipi or the first sweat lodge, our fasting areas, our endurance areas, where were those located and what was happening there? Those are some examples of cultural places and things that make locations sacred or significant. what we understand of the archaeological record consists of archaeological sites, collections of artifacts, and records from these sites, along with other archival information relating directly to some of our sacred and significant areas. Stewardship of the archaeological record involves not only the sites themselves, but other types of data and ways of interpretation that are associated with them. Since the contexts for both the pre-contact and contact periods are based exclusively on archaeological data, and because the ARC record is so different from the historic materials that are often associated with them, it's become necessary to reconsider the record and its context, thus leading to an enhanced understanding through traditional ecological knowledge, oral stories, and traditional knowledge exchange. Oral stories have helped inform all of us on how to better manage and protect significant areas while also keeping the traditional understanding alive. By integrating this traditional knowledge and oral stories, we are recontextualizing what we thought we knew about geographic areas, enhancing the cultural understanding and expanding the historical narrative for many locations and sites. By integrating traditional knowledge and oral stories, tribes have garnered support from our allies to co-manage and steward sites as we historically did. Returning traditional caretaking of lands and sites through an increased understanding of both the historical and archaeological record. Oral story is one of the most ancient practices, and as connection to lands are severed, stories are often lost. We are proud to say that we have contributed to many archaeological projects, studies, and surveys across the region, resulting in an enriched interpretation of the record and associated historic narrative. And this is where I was kind of hoping that Ed and I could engage more in a dialogue to talk about some of the partnerships and the changes that I have seen in my decade as a historic preservation officer. Because the things that are happening today through our partnerships and resource exchanges were not things that were happening 10 years ago. And it's really an exciting time to be in the profession. As many of you know, the state of Minnesota is in this era of reconciliation, and TIPOs are finding supportive allies in many agencies, not just state and federal, but museums, historical societies, places like community libraries. There is a professional expertise and resources that are, there's professional expertise and resources that are provided to our offices through academic and public sectors as well. So partnering with universities and cultural resource management firms, archaeologists have helped us build those relationships so that we can all do better work together. So I'm really happy to say that our tribe is one that will be partnering with the Science Museum of Minnesota to contribute to that digitization project about the weavers, hopefully in the next year. So that's just one example of many, many things that tribes are now getting involved in with other agencies. This kind of wraps up my presentation. I just wanted to also kind of mention that I'm really grateful to see some Dakota faces in the crowd, and thank you for coming to support this important topic. I think all of us in our own way have our TIPOs. We've all engaged in some type of historic preservation work, whether it was taking care of our family farms, or stewarding places that we know are significant or sacred for one reason or another. I'm just really glad that I could be a part of the discussion tonight and share some of my perspective. And thank you again.
take a few minutes for some questions, and if you would let me get back to you with the microphone, that would be great. So, and for Ed or Cheyanne, or both.
This is probably for both of them. What would be inappropriate for an entity like the Science Museum to retain in possession versus turning it back to the Native community?
Yeah.
That's a big question, I get it.
So as a curator at the Science Museum, the way I see it is it's not my decision, which is why we have to have consultations. People need to come to the museum to see what's at the museum and tell us what's inappropriate for us to have. And that's what we're actively doing. I don't inherently know that. And so it's critical that we have those kinds of discussions. And what is inappropriate could be a whole range of things, and it varies culturally too. You know, there isn't just a single category necessarily of item that we shouldn't have, but it's, you know, it's culturally defined, and it's not up to the museum to decide that.
Yep. And do you mention NAGPRA?
We haven't even gotten into NAGPRA. So there's a law called the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act that has certain categories of item. I mean, one of the categories is human remains. Another is funerary objects. Another is sacred objects, and another is patrimonious objects, things that belong to the community. And those are all eligible for repatriation under NAGPRA. But that doesn't get at everything necessarily, right? And so there's the legislated, you know, the law that museums, any institution that gets any federal funding needs to comply with that law. And so there's those categories, but even still, like with sacred objects or patrimonious objects, we don't necessarily know. So we invite communities to come and review the collections, or representatives from the communities, TIPOs or others, to review the collection. And sometimes they don't necessarily know, and they need to talk to other people. So it's really a process. And so, yeah, but there's those four NAGPRA categories, but there's all sorts of other things you could maybe imagine. If we have something that's 150 years old and we know that it's your great-great-great-grandma's or something like that, is it really best for it to be at a museum? Or maybe it should go back to the family, even if it's outside of NAGPRA, you know? So we're eager to have those kinds of discussions.
I wondered if you've ever found pipestone in this part of Minnesota, since it's so close. It's a lot closer than obsidian.
Pipestone, I mean, has been found in this part of Minnesota, absolutely, and pipestone has been found out kind of throughout Minnesota for sure. Yeah, I don't believe we've found any, but there are some examples from the St. Croix Valley.
I was wondering if the recent cutback in funds to the National Park Service will impact your monitoring program.
Thank you for your question. No, our monitoring program is not funded through the National Park Service funding at all. That's an internal program appropriation made by and for the tribal community. So I think we're in a pretty safe zone right now. In terms of our TIPO funding, that was kind of scary this year, but we did get our apportionment, and I know many states, fellow SHPO officers were forced to downsize their staff. Here in Minnesota, I think we have some strong advocacy with our SHPO, Amy Spongy, being very active in DC and lobbying and making sure that historic preservation programs, tribal and state, are supported out on the hill.
Any other questions here? Oh, okay, hang on. I'm gonna...
Cheyanne, I was curious if you could talk about the awareness of the St. Croix River Valley in particular, as a place, from your perspective. I'd just like you to speak to that from what you've heard, what you know, what you might be learning from research in the area about how the St. Croix Valley is special.
Yeah, and so when I talked to Rosie about the presentation and some of the cultural stories that are associated with this area, oftentimes what we do is opahe, and that's a Dakota word for like providing an offering, because what you're asking of the other person is sometimes spiritual or cultural knowledge that isn't really ours to give. So you want to offer tobacco and do share that information in a good way. And so for this portion, for my part of the presentation, I wanted to focus more on the work that I do as a professional. Now, my interpretation of this site and this topic as a Dakota woman or a Dakota citizen would look totally different. I would have opahed my elders, and I would have asked them what they knew about this area. What I can speak to from my perspective without that process being honored was that I know this area to be associated with many legends or myths. Iktomi stories is what we call them. So this landscape was, this portion of the river valley has a lot of stories that tie to our, some stories of creation, but like our trickster stories. So the trickster had a presence here. He engaged with bands and villages and people, indigenous people, Dakota people, Anishinaabe people, because their stories are very similar in this area, in this location. So, but like the village map that I shared, I know that historically those villages ran all the way up north to Lake Superior at different eras. The associations and whose villages and the size of them, I don't know, and I don't know the exact dates. So, but thank you for your question.
Question? This is more of a general question. Some of us with European backgrounds actually have Native American ancestry. How should us look at that?
That's a good question. So I think technology has come a long way, and for a lot of the work that we do at the historic site, we just recently, within the last 2 years, developed a research hub because so many people were coming into the site with European or mixed backgrounds and wanted to know like their family story. So we have a large population of Swedish immigrants in our area, and they wanted to know what their relationship was, their ancestors' relationship was with the US government and with the Dakota. And so part of the motivation or the impetus for establishing the research hub was to provide resources for that type of research. So, you know, things that I've seen done with families of mixed bloods and, you know, like diverse backgrounds is ancestry DNA. It's very controversial, I know, but I think a lot of people are getting on that wagon to at least get some kind of assurance or confirmation of if they have other relatives out there and what they know. But it is, it ultimately falls on the individual to do that research. And there are so many resources out there today, both online and in your local libraries and historical societies that could help you with that.
This is a question that, how are you preserving your oral history and keeping, not losing it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly a challenge within our tribal community because, you know, we have elders in our community that have been brought up a certain way because of historical traumas that they've endured, are very hesitant to share parts of their family and community histories. So it's really about, for us, my office is creating relationships. Like Judy here, she's amazing. She's been everywhere and knows just about every Indian that I know, and but really the relationship that we create with our community helps us to kind of ease into the collection of that oral story and oral knowledge. So we do have an internal database. We completed, I think it was pre-COVID, 2018. We had 30 elders that we were looking to interview in our community. We were able to get half of the oldest of that 30 recorded in audio interview. So we talked about community history, family associations, boarding school, and of those 15 that participated, there are only 3 that are left today. So, I mean, we could be doing better, but we're doing our best.
So I have a question. I just want, you know, I've lived here for 15 years in this river valley as a Dakota Weon. And in the last few years, well, and always the first time that I kayaked down the river, I knew that I was home. I felt it. Mm-hmm. And then more and more, the land speaks. When I went out to Yankton and talked to your uncle, he said that it was the ancestors that were speaking to me, mm-hmm. and that I needed to work with you to help protect, to call them home and protect our cemeteries, our effigies, our burial mounds, that the ancestors were upset. Mm. And so now you think about the temporal way of worldview and the spatial worldview, and then and I was reading Vine Deloria's God is Red, and the way that sacred spaces are, you know, sometimes, because you think about it, like our ancestors were forcibly removed from this area roughly 150 years ago. So that's 150 years of disconnection. And then I'm here as a Dakota woman now, and as I am walking the red road, the sacred path, the ceremony road, then I can hear and see more and more on this spiritual level the ancestors. And I know Wakiawi, Knapp's Cave, is a sacred site. So would it be you, Cheyanne, that I would ask to, would I bring you to that site? And have you been there?
It would, I mean, I think there's two answers to that. Like I mentioned earlier, there would be my answer as a Dakota person. Yes, let's go there. Let's see what it's about. And then my role as a TIPO is fairly restrictive in the sense that it depends on what status the land is. Is it state-owned? Is it private-owned? Is it, you know?
National Park.
National Park Service land.
We've got it in.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, that would be really great. So we do have authority within.
I want to go hiking, and I'll bring you some chichacha.
That sounds great.
All right, I don't think we can top Rosie for the last question. So I want to thank first of all, another hand for Ed and Cheyanne. And they're both here if you want to talk to them after and come up and respectfully look at some of the artifacts up here. And we thank you all for coming tonight.